Welcome, Dr. Epic here. And what we're going to discuss in this section is tar, jewelry, fish bones, and fishing camps on the Texas coast, as we continue our exploration of the human ecology of the Karankawa people of coastal Texas. We're going to follow that outline right up above my head, so put that in your notes as we proceed to gather the information needed to answer that question right there. And that question reads, what is human ecology? What is a seasonal round? Given the current archaeological evidence, what is the human ecology of the Karankawa? How did it shift over time, and why did it shift over time? And you should keep that question percolating in the back of your head as we move through the literature and as we begin to move into the actual archaeological evidence of the Karankawa people of coastal Texas. The Karankawa people lived in this huge arc in southeast Texas, and they're very distinct. You can always tell when you encounter the Karankawa people in the archaeological record because that is evident through their very, very distinct pottery. And that pottery is known as Rockport Ceramics. In fact, that's Rockport Ceramics right over my head. So the Karankawa are known historically to produce this type of ceramics called Rockport Ceramics. Now, Rockport ceramics are very distinct. Nobody else uses anything like Rockport ceramics. And when you find a lot of Rockport ceramics in the archaeological record, that is a surefire indicator that you are dealing with a Karankawa site. Now, Rockport ceramics themselves are a very simple coil and paddle ceramic that's then fired in open kilns. But what makes Rockport ceramics distinct is that the Karankawa made use of a natural substance called asphaltum. And asphaltum is the black parts on the pottery that you see right over my head. You can see it, it's right there. Now, what is asphaltum? Asphaltum is naturally occurring tar. And in fact, you see it right over there on the upper left. Asphaltum naturally occurs. You can walk along the beaches of Texas, and if your eyes are quite sharp, you can actually see it. They're little balls, they're little chunks of tar, they're about that big. Now, what is asphaltum? Asphaltum is oil that naturally leaks from the ocean bed at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Asphaltum comes from these oil deposits at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. It naturally seeps through the bottom of the ocean and then appears, and it rises to the top of the water because oil and water, of course, don't mix. And then it turns into these little kind of soft tar balls, bobs around the surface of the ocean, and the currents naturally carry it to the beaches of coastal Texas, where they wash ashore as little small, soft tar balls that are about 2 to 3 centimeters across. They're about yay big. And it's what the Karankawa would then do next that made the Rockport ceramics distinct, which is they would put the asphaltum next to their campfires. The heat from the fire would then soften and melt the tar, and they would then use it to decorate and to make as a functional element in their ceramics. You can see it in the ceramics that are right up above my head. That black smeared area, that's asphaltum, that's tar. And what they're using it is they're using it to waterproof their ceramics to make sure that the liquid inside the ceramics doesn't sweat to the outside of the vase. It is a very effective means of waterproofing ceramics, although it probably would give the water a bit of a tarry taste. And no other Native American group really made use of asphaltum in the same way. And the Karankawa wouldn't just use it as a functional element. You can see from the sherds right up above my head that they would actually use it as a decorative element as well. Make the tar very soft and use it to put a nice black rim band along the top of their vessel. Use it to put these vertical dashes down the sides of their vessel, or in that sherd right up above my head, dip it in their finger and give it a little jagged squiggle right down the side of the sherd. And when you find abundant Rockport ceramics in the archaeological record, that is a dead giveaway for the presence of the Karankawa people. No other Native American group really possessed such a distinct ceramic tradition, or they didn't have access to the asphaltum that naturally washes ashore on the beaches of Texas. Now, the Karankawa pre-existed Rockport ceramics. They only start making Rockport ceramics, in the 13th century AD. And of course, but they continue to make Rockport ceramics right up until the final demographic collapse of the Karankawa themselves in the 19th century. Now, Rockport ceramics are heavily associated with sites all along the Texas coast. And if you can see there in the map that's right up above my head, everything that's a triangle is a site that's been found with Rockport Ceramics. And indeed, you can take all of the sites where Rockport Ceramics occur, and you can group them into basically by their size and their location. So they can be divided into roughly two groups. Group 1 sites and Group 2 sites. Group 1 sites are large sites that are always found along the coast. That's what we're going to deal with in the next section. Group 2 sites are much smaller sites that are found along rivers in the interior of the coastal plain. So let me run that by you one more time because it's important. Group 1 sites are very large sites that are found on the coast. Group 2 sites are very small sites that are found along rivers in the interior on the coastal plain, always next to rivers. We're going to deal with Group 1 sites first, and then we're going to deal with Group 2 sites because they were used for very different things. And a really good example of a Group 1 site is the Kirchmeier site. The Kirchmeier site, as you can see from the map on the left, it's the circled in red. It's the triangle that's circled in red. That's called Kirchmeier. So Kirchmeier is one of these big Group 1 sites. It's physically located on something called Osso Bay, which is on Corpus Christi Bay. And it's a rather large site. The Kirchmeier site is 10,000 square meters. And it's located on these clay flats that overlook the beach itself. Now, if you can see from the picture right up above me, that sort of dark blackish smear, that is the Kirchmeier site. It's the edge of the Kirchmeier site, which is slowly eroding into the Gulf of Mexico itself. So basically, the photographer is standing with his back to the water, and the village, or whatever Kirchmeier was, would have been located on the sort of rise that overlooks the beach itself. So Kirchmeier site is this big, long site that's sort of stretched out along the beach, and it overlooks the beach. And Kirchmeier is actually probably slightly bigger than 10,000 square meters, as you have various lenses of occupation are found all along all along Osso Bay. So the area is not a permanent site. It's being used seasonally, and it's being used occasionally. And when the Karankawa would return to this part of the coast, they would settle in a slightly different part of the coast. So that's why you see in the map right up above me, those big triangles, these Group 1 sites, they're never exactly in the same spot. They're always in different parts around Corpus Christi Bay. And they might not return to the same part of the bay, for a decade or two. Kirchmeier has been sporadically excavated since the 1920s, with various excavation yielding the presence of a very large hunting/fishing camp. Significant amounts of chipped stone points were discovered. And if you look on the left, these are these sort of chipped arrowheads. These points are made of chert, which is a fine-grained cryptocrystalline stone. But here's the important part. Chert does not naturally occur along the Texas coast. To find outcroppings of this kind of chert, you have to go to central Texas, pretty much around the Austin or Waco area, central Texas. So people are bringing in stone from other parts of Texas. And we've got definite movement between coastal Texas and central Texas. And I want to point out one of the things about these stone points, that these stone points are absolutely terrible. They are very crudely made. They're very badly made. And it seems that the Karankawa on coastal Texas would occasionally run out of high quality central Texas chert. And sometimes they would make arrowheads from things that weren't chert. On the left, those are very, very crude arrow points that are being made from oyster shell. They're chipping oyster shell to make these very crude, very simple points. And if you see right up above me, that's not chert. That's the scale from an alligator gar. So they're actually using fish scales, and in this case, an alligator gar scale. Alligator gars are these big, spooky-looking fish. If you want some nightmare fuel, Google alligator gar. They're big, scary-looking fish. This suggests that these people are camping along the coast, and they're staying long enough to basically run out of chert. So they have to fall back on making very bad, very low quality arrowheads from oyster shell, from gar. And if you look back at the previous slide, even those central Texas chert arrowheads, very crudely made, very badly made. And cogitate on this question for a second. Why are they making low quality arrowheads along the Texas coast? Think on that for a second. Now, one of the things that indicates that this is a Karankawa site is, of course, Rockport Ceramics. That's where that really beautiful vase on the upper left has been found. If you look right up above me, there's more sherds decorated with that squiggly asphaltum line. And if you look right there, that's actually a deer horn. And they've decorated that deer horn with asphaltum, with that squiggly little line, the same design motif that you find on the ceramics. As for what the design motif means, I have no idea. But they also found jewelry. They are intricately carving jewelry from oyster shells and from mother of pearl that they'll locate along the coast. And some of this jewelry is really quite beautiful. And this was recovered from Kirchmeier. And this would have dangled from the ears or maybe from the nipples of some of these big Karankawa men. So yes, we are confirming some aspects of the archaeological record. They are into jewelry. But again, I want to note the quality of this jewelry. The fine perforations that have been punctured along the side. The same people that are making very beautiful, very high quality shell jewelry are still making low quality arrowheads. Cogitate on that for a second. Here's some very nicely layered stratigraphy from Kirchmeier. Periodic flooding would cover the archaeological record, sealing in successive occupations, successive uses of the Kirchmeier site. So basically the Karankawa would move in, they would occupy Kirchmeier for maybe a season or two, then they would leave, and then there would be another depositional episode of, a storm surge or a tidal flat leaving a covering of tidal sand across the site. And then maybe a decade or two would go by and the Karankawa would come back and then leave another material from another camp across the same site. So the result is that you have absolutely beautiful stratigraphy at the Kirchmeier site. So the site has this punctuated nature of its occupation, with people leaving and then returning to use the site time and time again. And radiocarbon dating from Kirchmeier has indicated that the earliest usage of Kirchmeier is 3000 BC. And I want you to kind of pause and wrap your brain around this for a second. The Native Americans of Texas figured out how to sustainably interact with the environment of Texas 5,000 years ago. They're using these sites, at impossibly ancient times. The final layer of Kirchmeier is in the early 19th century. And in fact, we know it's the early 19th century because American artifacts turn up at Kirchmeier. If you look right up above my head, there are buttons from the U.S. Cavalry. If you look over there, there's materials from English and American culture. Over there on the bottom left, those are gun flints that are used by the flintlock guns at the same time. And in fact, the buttons right up above my head can be traced to a precise military unit, because the military unit that was issued uniforms with those buttons was the United States 2nd Dragoons. And the historical record shows that this group was this unit was stationed at Corpus Christi in 1845, just prior to the outbreak of the Mexican War. And some of the soldiers that were stationed there were not above trading some of their buttons to the local Karankawa, maybe in return for fish or in return for oysters or in return for something. But some of these military buttons show up in the final layers of Kirchmeier. And in addition to buttons or gun flints, you actually have high quality British ceramics begin to turn up. These are British transfer wares. So one of the things that the Karankawans are trading for at the very end are high quality British ceramics. Now, these are British ceramics. I mean, they look Chinese, but that's actually because these are British ceramics, and this is how I'll tell you how the world flips and how everything that is old is new again. In the 19th century, the British made cheap knockoffs of high quality Chinese goods. Okay, so these are all decorated with Oriental motifs, but they're all made in Great Britain. And this type of ceramics, these British transferwares were extremely popular among American settlers because they could buy this very cheap British ceramics and it looks like really nice, like Chinese porcelain. But however it got there, somehow these British knockoffs of Chinese porcelain ended up in Native American villages along the Texas coast. So they are trading with this material. And this is the final layer of Kirchmeier, this late 19th century, the 1848 into the 1850s. And as we'll see, that's the last layer of the Karankawa people altogether. And they are making more tools. These are shell tools. What they've done here is they've taken an oyster shell on over there on the left. They've taken an oyster shell, and right up above they've taken a clam shell. And what they've done is they've chipped off the sides along one edge to give it this kind of serrated razor edge. And what they're doing with that is they're probably scaling fish with it. Is that you would grab the shell and scrape it along against the grain of the fish to basically scale fish very, very quickly. And we know they're eating a lot of fish along this coast because they're leaving the bones in their middens. What kind of fish are they eating? Well, it shouldn't surprise you. They are eating drumfish, red drum and black drumfish. Now, one of the unusual things about drumfish is that drumfish have little bones that are located in their ears, and those bones are called otoliths. And the archaeologists studying Kirchmeier and the archaeologists studying the Karankawa sites along the Texas coast figured out that one of the really cool things about otoliths is you can take an otolith, slice it in half, look at it with a microscope, and you end up with that image on the lower left. So what is that image? Well, I have to explain to you something about otoliths. An otolith is a tiny little fish bone that occurs in the ears of drumfish. And the otolith, the bone itself, doesn't grow in size, but rather as the fish ages, it adds a layer onto its otoliths every year it is alive. In other words, the otolith of a fish, its ear bone, functions just like the rings in a tree. That if you take an otolith and you slice it in half, it'll tell you a couple things. It'll tell you how old the fish was when it was caught and eaten. And you can literally count the rings of that otolith on the lower left, and it will tell you how old that fish was when the Karankawa caught it and ate it. The other thing it tells you is that the color of the ring indicates the time of year in which the fish was caught. Light rings indicate summer, dark rings indicate winter. And if you look at that otolith right there, you realize that the final ring is quite dark, which indicates that that fish died during the winter. And in fact, of the otoliths recovered from Kirchmeier, 81% of them had thin, dark otolith rings at the time of death. Think about that. What does that say? What does that say that they're eating drumfish and that the drumfish have thin otolith rings at the time of death? Now, looking at the actual bones themselves and looking at the shells from the middens, you can actually examine the minimum number of individuals of the consumed animals. So what we have here is a chart which lists the MNI, that means the minimum number of individuals, and it shows you the numbers of each type of fish that were consumed during one of the usages of this sort of coastal camp. And you can see they ate at least 35 red drum, they ate at least 34 redfish, they ate at least 16 trout, at least one gar, and you can just literally just go down that list and you can see what types of food that they're processing along the coast of Texas. And you can see a couple things, which is one, they are eating a lot of shellfish, lots of scallops, lots of oysters, lots of whelks, lots of shark's eyes, lots of quahogs. And in addition to the shellfish, they're eating a lot of bony fish. There's black drum, there's redfish, there's sheep's head, there's trout, there's croakers. They're eating a lot of marine resources while they're camping along the coast. And they're supplementing this with occasionally hunting deer, white-tailed deer. There's some adults and juveniles, and there's a bobcat. I hope they didn't eat the poor kitty. Maybe they just kept it as a pet. I have no idea. But we do know what they're eating from their middens along the Texas coast. And these are photographs of what these middens actually look like. And you can see that they are just dense with shell. Most of what they're eating along the coast is shellfish, oysters, whelks, rangia clams, lightning whelks. And they're supplementing that with drumfish with just a tiny sliver of deer at the end. And you can see that huge, thick layer of oyster shells in the photograph. And here's what one of those oyster middens looks from the top. You can literally see it's a huge bed. It's a massive midden of shell, being mostly scallops, oysters, and lightning whelks. So they're eating a lot of shellfish while they're staying along the coast. And you can actually radiocarbon date each depositional event from when the Karankawa people made use of this one site. And you can see there's, 2700 BP, that means before present. There's 2300 BP, all the way up to 1420 BP. They are repeatedly using these sites along the coast. And if we map out a lot of these sites, if we map out the overall occupation, we can see that as they're using these coastal sites, they're using these coastal sites for a really, really long time. All of these numbers are BP, that of course means before present. And altogether, the dates on these shoreline sites tell us, and they show the same patterns of occupation. The Karankawa, or at least the ancestors of the Karankawa, show up archaeologically at about 1000 BC, which is 3000 BP, on the Texas coast, as the Texas coastline settles into its current configuration. And it lasts right up until, the last generations of Karankawa in the 19th century. And those are the group 1 sites. We're going to get to the group 2 sites in the next section. And we're going to talk about what these people are doing along the rivers, because you should, at least by now, have figured out what the Karankawa are doing along the coast, who is doing it there, and what time of the year they are doing it. But that's group 1 sites. We're going to address group 2 sites in the next section, and I will see you there.